We are in study session and going to be doing some more equity work with Marcus. So, Marcus, I'll just let you take it away.
Hello, just trying to get my screen situated. We are working today on condition 4 from the Singleton book. And I think you guys received some prompts regarding this, so we'll be spending some time basically reflecting on those prompts. And I just want to, reiterate the purpose of this book study, which is where I'm starting with all the groups that I'm working with, is this belief that we need to create the conditions for us to be able to talk about and to particularly hear perspectives that are different than our own. And so this is a book that is attempting to help us develop the skill set, the toolkit, so that we can engage in those kind of conversations. And hopefully we'll be in a position to where we can hear truths from our families, from our students in a different way as a result of our engagement in this study. So I wanted to start with the poem that was on page 127. And I was gonna impose on our superintendent to just read it to us, have a story time.
Certainly, thank you. All right. We need to really talk. I'm overwhelmed. Don't make me wash the colors, the heritage, the language. I don't want to. We need to really talk, as though no one is judging, but everyone is listening. It's easy to forget that life is complex enough that love and hate, acceptance and fear grow in one. Don't just like me, ask me, make me question, make me uncertain. And in this time of doubt, let's do something. Forget stereotypes, lose our words to internal thoughts. I am not saying we're going to move the world, but we can provoke a shift in our minds, moving away from ignorance, discrimination, and the belief that we understand without experiencing.
So I just wanted to ask you all, as you were hearing the poem, as you read it, maybe even as you read it before today, where do you find yourself on the compass? And what do you think the author of that poem, Janaka, is trying to say? And I'll start with Reverend Davis.
How did I know I was going to be the one to get the start? Well, in the compass, I feel like I'm at the on the acting, in the soul. I'm in these 3 areas. I think the poem is very straightforward. It expresses, some things that I feel, it can be overwhelming. We really need to talk about this. We won't change it, and we won't change the world, but we can change where we are right now and to make it better. I like the poem. Enough of talk. Let's put it into action. Let's be action oriented. Let's be relational. It's gonna be emotional. Let's do it in tech with intellect and with morals. I'm in the center with all of this, and I like we need to talk, because we do need to talk, and the more we talk, the better, the more insight we get. And hear my truth, and I'll hear your truth. But respect my truth, and I'll respect your truth.
Thank you. One more. Any person want to volunteer to have a reaction, different reaction, similar reaction?
Sure. I am somewhere in the middle also, not quite to the acting phase yet. Mainly because I feel I don't always have the right words to move into acting. In the past, when I have moved into acting, it's not usually well received or received in the wrong way. So I think using different words is important. And so the thinking piece in particular, I think will help me in this book. I think will help me use different words or better words when I move into the acting phase. I think the author of the poem is pretty much expressing the goal of our book study, saying that we do need to have a talk about race, and let's not make any assumptions. Let's talk with open hearts and open minds.
Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Pimpleton, I just wanted to add, if I may, it seems like there's an internal conflict with one's own identity, the culture, the heritage, our color of our skin, languages, so forth. There seems like that there's a conflict of not wanting to let that go, but to participate in our community, in our mainstream or society, whatever, right? There's that push thing that I want to belong. I want to be involved. I want people to respect me for who I am, but I still have all this culture within me, my color, my language, the food, everything that I don't want to let go. It's part of me, and I, accept it or don't accept it, but I'd rather you accept it and respect it and so forth. And that, that despite all that, maybe we come from different backgrounds, that we all want the same thing, right? Is to live a happy, joyful life, healthy, fruitful life. That's what I'm kind of getting from what he's saying here, that mainly the internal conflict.
Yeah, wanting to be able to show up as their full self.
Yes.
And have their full self fully embraced. Yeah, thank you for those. So I wanted to revisit where we've been. This is a building of skills that we build one skill at a time, and then we continue to practice the skill, or we introduce one skill at a time, and then we continue to practice the skills that we have previously introduced as we add another. So condition 1, we were telling our stories. You all did your racial autobiographies, focusing on race in your own lives, and we want to continue to look at race in our own lives, being clear about isolating race. We're coming to a conversation that specifically, we know the topic is going to be on race, and keeping the spotlight, the focus on race, primarily because we know it's an uncomfortable subject and it's a place that we're not skilled. And we've been socialized quite a bit to not talk about race. And so we're trying to practice and develop that particular skill set. Not to say that we end there, but we want to get to a place to where we have some ability in that before we start to add on these other things that are also important for us to talk about. Then our last session, we were talking about, the session before our last session, we were talking about normalizing social construction and multiple perspectives, that our experiences were socialized through those experiences, and that we have to be able to surface perspective that we might not always have access to. And then on this condition, it's about really the technical aspects of that, monitoring our agreements, monitoring these conditions that we're working on, and establishing parameters for the conversation. So we want to be trying to practice all of those things as we do this. And so the first prompt that I want to ask and hear a few people respond to, what do you believe to be some of the necessary parameters for effective interracial conversations about race to occur? And to what extent do you believe those to be present or missing in your work setting? And by your work setting, I mean the context of your work together as a board.
Do we just respond at will, or?
Yeah, you can respond at will,
Okay.
but I will notice who's not and call on them. So.
Okay, well, I would say one of the key parameters would be always careful listening. And the other one is to not make assumptions. about people, and always check understanding, so that we're not putting anyone in boxes or assume that they've had certain experiences or certain beliefs, but that to always check that.
I agree with Norm. Is the listening and not putting someone in a box and understanding where each individual is coming from, and not thinking that they had that experience, and to respect that.
I would add that there needs to be an acknowledgement that race is an important topic to discuss, and an acknowledgement that it's something that needs to be discussed.
I would add that I got a long list here. Just understanding, right? That we seek to understand each other, despite our backgrounds. We want to do that, but not only to do that, but also to be accepting of one's culture, of one's thoughts, opinions. That's a difficult thing to do nowadays, especially with the political climate that we're in. But even as Singleton said, to stay engaged, right? Speak your truth and experience discomfort. And then he also said, do not expect closure. And I would say, do not expect everybody to agree, right? Because we all have our own opinions and thoughts and worldviews. So we're not all going to agree on this topic.
Thank you. Martha, did you want to jump in there, or I'll push ahead?
No, I would just say, listen with an open and non-judgmental heart.
Yeah. I like what Raymond had to say there. He said accepting, and then later said, we're not always going to agree. And there's a tension between those two things, because people feel like if you don't agree with them, that you're not accepting. And we have to practice living in that tension, that we are accepting, meaning we want to surface all the perspectives so that we can hear all the different points of view. That doesn't, and we want to create a space where those are surfaced, even though we're not going to necessarily agree with all the points of view that are surfaced. But you want to create a space to where they can be surfaced, and where you can hear them, and where you respect the fact that people have different points of view. So this part, the discussion in the book has a discussion about white talk versus color commentary. And in it, Singleton is describing 8 characteristics that he calls predictable patterns. He says multiple times that he's not suggesting that all white people or all people of color and indigenous people will follow the pattern. And he makes a distinction between a pattern and a stereotype. He says that patterns are characteristic of how people of racial groupings typically, rather than stereotypically, respond when faced with racial subject matter. So, and I guess what I would say I got out of reading it is, he's saying if you were to record 100 conversations where people of color were engaging in cross-racial discussions where race was a central topic, you're going to see these aspects of color commentary show up as a sort of a theme. It doesn't mean every single person is going to act according to that, but you will see a theme in that. And he's saying the same thing about white groupings, is that you will see some themes in the way that people interact. And he is pushing us in this chapter to make sure that we're balancing the two approaches, creating the space for both approaches to emerge. So I wanted to ask you, as you were reading this section in particular, where did you find yourself on the compass as you were reading him talk about white talk versus color commentary? And to what extent did it resonate with you or diverge from your own thinking?
I have to admit, I kind of chuckled as I read that. I am very clearly in the color commentary section. Whenever I have discussions about race, almost each of those are things that I experience.
Go ahead. Sorry, I need to grab water.
And then when I've had discussions about race with white people, it's, you know, my experiences, folks have very much been in the white talk column. So I thought this was very representative of the discussions that I've had.
Any others? And I have these actually laid out in the next few slides, so we could go through slide by slide and just talk about the characteristic.
Yeah,
I found
mine
myself in.
also.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, no. Age
Okay,
before beauty.
Yeah, well, I found myself in both places. I think sometimes it's really true, but I appreciated his statement about not allowing it to be a stereotype, because even I tend to be kind of analytical, but even as I've analyzed, I've noticed that, and you've probably noticed too, once I got off on a topic, I kind of maybe get into some emotional areas or some sensitive areas. And so I've been both, and I have had in the past, and with you folks, I've had conversations with people that are on both sides of that spectrum or different parts of that spectrum. And I've found myself responding in both ways. So it's not always within the pattern, but I would admit that's probably my first initial reaction would be to sort of fit the pattern, but I don't stay there.
It's for me, it's been in the middle on both sides. Sometimes I get real vocal, and a lot of times I get really emotional, especially when I sense that I'm not being heard. And I take things to task a lot. I try to stay focused and engaged in the dialogue a lot. So it's majority of the time is on the color commentary.
Yeah, and for the people who are watching and don't have the book, let's take a look at the patterns here. So in the broad summary of it, on the white talk side, he says, white talk tends to be more verbal, focused on talking and offering racial meaning through word choice. So being really careful about the word choice, the voice tone and intonation. Whereas on the color commentary side, focus on offering racial meaning through facial expressions, body movements, and physical gestures. Where I was working last year in Quincy, the assistant superintendent, he would text me sometimes to say that my face was revealing how I felt about what was going on in the meeting. And it wasn't trying to change me. He was just laughing at that. But he said he could see in my body language when I was saying, no, this isn't right. And he knew to then talk to me or call me to have something to say, like it was already being communicated. It's very hard in these online settings to have that, especially when the groups are large. You can't see the body language of the people in the group as easily. But there are differences. Like I say a lot, especially if I'm in church. My sister will text me when I'm playing the piano at church, and she'll text me when I don't necessarily agree with what the pastor's saying. And I'll be like, she's like, fix your face. And because it shows up and my face cannot hide it. White talk being more impersonal, focused on the sharing of racial perspectives or experiences of someone not immediately present or involved in the conversation. Seen that a lot, where you ask a question about race and they'll talk about someone else's experience or something that they read or not their own experience, to where when I'm sharing, I find I'm much more personal. I'm sharing my own experiences and what happened to me and how I felt about those things. White talk being more intellectual, focused on what one thinks or has read with respect to race, whereas color commentary will be more emotional, focused on what one felt or has experienced with respect to race. And then white talk being much more task-oriented. So the focus is on engaging in dialogue for the purpose of solving a problem or getting something accomplished. And when I do this work with larger groups, it's always like, well, when are we going to get to the list of here are the things to do to fix racism in our school? And it's like, the thing that I'm trying to get you to do is to engage in a conversation with people who don't look like you so that they can tell you what they are experiencing in your setting, and you can then figure out what it is that you need to do in response to hearing those stories. It's not a checklist, right? Color commentary on that side being more process oriented, focused on engaging in dialogue for the purpose of feeling present, connected, or heard. And there's a quote at the top of page 133 where he says, of course, not all white people engage in white talk, and not all people of color and indigenous people engage in color commentary. In fact, to survive and advance in educational contexts, usually governed by white people, people of color typically learn and practice white talk because it is the language of power and influence. Likewise, some white people have developed color commentary characteristics as a way of being more effective and accepted in their conversations with people of color and indigenous people. And so that really resonated with me, because I feel like I would not be able to get to some of the places that I've been able to work and serve if I was not effective in using white talk when I need to use white talk. And I also have noticed that the people who interact with me more frequently, the white people that I've had relationships with for longer periods of time, they start to also embrace the characteristics of color commentary. I've definitely seen that shift. So any thoughts about this slide before we move on?
I'm just wondering about definitions, because he uses white talk versus white comment or color commentary. I'm just wondering about the difference between talk and commentary. I don't know. That's just a little thing that I've been kind of looking at. What's the difference in that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think he's using it for effect of the way that the words play, maybe, but
Okay.
That's a question I would want to ask him. I don't think there's necessarily a science to it. I think he is just reflecting on his experience facilitating thousands of these conversations, and this is just the way that he's chosen to describe it. But he could have easily just said white talk, color talk.
Yeah. I'm just wondering. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna push ahead. So I'm asking you, or he's asking in this book, think of an interracial conversation about race in which you recently have been involved. Can the overall conversation be characterized more by the features of white talk or color commentary? And which of the characteristics best defines your own personal contributions to the dialogue? So some of you already started talking about that, so I'm gonna go to Martha for this one.
A recent conversation I had was with a group of white people, and clearly in that group there were differing points of view about race and racial attitude and racial equity. It was interesting to listen to their words and listen to the language that was being used. Those who didn't believe that racism really played a role in much of anything in our society were using very, very powerful and direct words. And those who had the opposite belief were quite indirect. And even though they were white, they were using color commentary as part of the conversation. I found that to be a little bit interesting.
I think you guys were all kind of commenting on where your communication style tends to be. Raymond, do you find that your communication style falls in one of these or the other, or that you find yourself equally pulling from both?
Yeah, I kind of go from side to side depending. Like I mean, I have the nonverbal, but I'll speak up when I feel I need to, right? Especially when it comes to any racism or racist comments or so forth. I'll point it out. And when it comes to personal, I do speak from my personal experiences and my experience with racism and discrimination. So I do kind of swing back and forth on those two, on the white talk and the color commentary.
Do any of you find that your style changes when the subject is not race? Like, do you show up in one of these areas when we're not talking about race, and then in the other when the subject is on race, or is it pretty consistent in all sorts of conversations that you're typically a certain way?
For me, it goes back and forward depending on what we're talking about. But when the subject of race comes in, I become more color commentary. But I do speak up, and I do share my personal experiences. It can go back and forward depending on what crowd I'm in.
For me, sometimes it isn't so much what the topic of the conversation is, but my closeness to the person I'm having the conversation with. So that's sometimes more of a factor than whatever the topic is.
I'd say my style definitely changes. Anything about race or with people I'm very comfortable with, like family and friends, I'm very clearly in the color commentary. At work, I'm very clearly in the white talk column.
Yeah. I think for me, I definitely, most of my life, I'm in that color commentary time, but it's weird when I'm asked to facilitate a conversation about race, then I find myself pushing myself to the white talk because that's the space that I'm facilitating the conversation in. And last time I was in church, I was asked to speak at a church in Seattle, and Reverend Davis had just sent me this article about white supremacy, and so I had read this material, and then when I got up to speak, like I was in my color commentary speaking about this subject, and then by the end of it, I was like, oh man, I hope I'm not preaching myself out of a job, just because it's a very different, the way that you talk about the subject is different based on your audience a lot of times, and it's a lot more freeing to be around people who get it and have had similar experiences. So that's definitely something that I noticed about myself. Did anyone else want to comment here before I push forward?
I just want to say that, I don't know, maybe for me, there's a third when it comes to the verbal. Is more like professional, being firm and, authoritative, but not in a different way, right? Based on research and data and those type of things. So I kind of see myself engaging in that when I respond to I'm not going to be loud and yelling but there's times when I did do that, right? When you're at the store and there's a line of people and they skip my voice has gotten loud and all that kind of stuff when I was younger. But I would see there's another style in there as well that I tend to use. Yeah. So it's more firm, I guess professional, quote professional, using some of my counseling training, paraphrasing, all that kind of stuff, establishing trust and rapport and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah. So he has another chart that explores this white talking color commentary. So we're going to look at those. So first on the verbal and nonverbal, he goes into a little more detail here, and he says, in white talk, it's characterized by loud, authoritative, and interrupted speech. Value is placed on expressing oneself and controlling the conversation. It shows up in terms of, so as an example, who speaks first, who speaks the longest, who speaks the most often. And the nonverbal, characterized by silent respect for as well as a disconnect from the one talking and or positional cultural authority. Communication takes place through body motions and other nonverbal expressions. So there'll be folded arms, silence, sighs, rolling of the eyes, refusal to offer direct eye contact. So it offers a little more detail on the verbal versus nonverbal. Any thoughts on the verbal, nonverbal? And then on the impersonal versus personal, typically spoken. Okay, I don't know where I was at. It just said I lost the internet, but I'm in my office at work, so I don't even know. Like, now I'm running it through my phone, so maybe my phone internet will work a little better. We'll see. Where was I?
You were at impersonal and personal.
Yeah. Okay, so on the personal, typically spoken in first person, great value placed on sharing one's own story and experience, talking about the police pulled them over. As an indigenous person, I don't trust white people. We believe that such and such has a problem with indigenous people. So talking more about firsthand experiences in this particular, when we're in the personal versus the impersonal. Intellectual versus emotional, and this is the one that gets me the most and that I experience the most often. And the intellectual dialogue is abstract and disconnected from immediate and local reality, more interested in quantitative analysis of one's thinking. Like, what does the statistics say? Do the data really suggest that it is because of race? I once read that so-and-so said that. Can you give me a citation that supports that? What university did he attend? It's very about what you can chart and measure and what's the data and the research, and your personal experience in that kind of conversation becomes somewhat disregarded or less valued. In emotional color commentary, the dialogue is centered on immediate and local racial reality, more interested in qualitative analysis and feelings. I don't feel as though you like or respect me as a Black teacher. I feel alone here as the only teacher of color. I get so angry when they speak for me, misinterpret and misrepresent me. I don't trust, I don't feel safe. And so I wanted to ask you all, what's kind of been your experience around this particular, the intellectual versus the emotional, and make connections to the compass if that's helpful. But
I can relate to both the intellectual and the emotional. Having people speak, thinking they're speaking to me, but really not. And I can relate to both of them. Had both of them happen. But, work through it, and it's a work in progress. Something that you constantly have to do. I'd say I have had both sides of that, intellectual and emotional.
any others? What happens when two
I was just
people are
going to
in
say,
very different places?
well, I
ahead.
would just say I would hope that this doesn't get separated into a dichotomy with a value attached to each one. I think there are times and moments we need both kinds of information, and we need to be within ourselves. We need to be in touch with both kinds of experience, and when it's functioning, that there is a time for data and statistics and evidence, and there also is a time to just be aware of what's going on with our own feelings and what's happening in the room. So there's certainly, we need to be able to access both types of information.
Absolutely. And that is an excellent segue. So I'm going to skip over this task versus process oriented. I think we got that. But this slide is on unbalanced. So what happens when the conversation is unbalanced in terms of the communication style? What happens when it's heavily on the white talk side or heavily on the color commentary side? What happens in those kind of spaces? Have you experienced those?
Sure, I've had conversations that were very unbalanced, and depending on several, I guess, depending on the situation, I've felt very unsafe and to the point where I just had to back down because I just felt very uncomfortable and unsafe. There's other times where I felt more empowered. Maybe there was slightly more balance, even though it was pretty unbalanced, where I felt empowered to continue and share more about what I was thinking. I think it kind of has just depended on the group of people or the person that I'm talking to.
Well, Raymond alluded to it earlier, which is, I think when you're in a conversation, you have the sense that it's getting out of balance that way is to go back to listening skills and active listening and paraphrasing and looking for the other person's meaning. And that's a way to kind of get balance back into that conversation.
Yeah. I've been in those uncomfortable situations as well, and not feeling unsafe, but I think I made people feel threatened because I kept on speaking my truth and still wasn't being heard. So you just be silent for a moment and let them work it out, and then it comes back to hearing you. It's a balance to be unbalanced. Does that make sense? It's okay to be unbalanced, but to get back into balance, and it's and then we work through it together, and that's the beautiful part. When they can now see and hear you, it makes balance back to balance.
I think for me, when I get in those unbalanced situations, I ask the person to clarify, what do you mean by that, that all Black people or all Mexicans or all this do that? Or so I ask for clarification so I can understand. And when I'm feeling uncomfortable, right, I want to first seek to understand where they're coming from. And if it's blatant racism, then you call it out, right? I think we live in a day where we can challenge people and call it out when it happens. You know, I work with great colleagues at my job, and whenever they hear something or something that, you know, that even kind of alludes to racism or discrimination, they call it out immediately. But they do it respectfully and professionally and tactfully and so forth. So
I want to push our attention. I'm going to scroll back. First of these conditions. So for me, a strategy that I use is, first, I'm not really engaging in a lot of multiracial conversation with folks if we have not talked about these agreements and conditions first. So for me, the more that the folks who I'm interacting with have looked at these conditions and these agreements, then the more of myself I feel like I can bring to the conversation. Because until we agree that there are some ground rules for how we have these conversations, then it's just anyone's game, and I'm usually outnumbered and I'm gonna lose in that setting. But if we have some ground rules, then I can say, okay, this discussion is unbalanced, partly because we're not isolating race and we've now entered in all these other topics in. So let's monitor this condition and make sure that we're focused on discussing race. Or let's make sure that we're focusing on social construction and embracing multiple perspectives. It sounds like there's not really a point of view being expressed here, or we're just all focused on this data, third person stuff that we're not directly connected to. Let's focus on our personal, local, immediate, and talk about how this actually directly impacts us. So I go back to these kind of ground rules to make sure that that happens. I use prompts that are rooted in that so that that doesn't happen in the conversations that I'm facilitating. So that's why this conversation could go all kinds of ways if I just came in here and said, let's talk about race, and I'm not using anything to kind of ground it, but I'm using this to ground it. That's why I think this book is so important, because we build all of these conditions and then we have some ground rules so that when it gets tense, we can go back and say, okay, well, which of the conditions are we not practicing as well? So the last thing I want to draw our attention to, we could talk about this for a long time, are these suggestions. So for folks who are facilitating these conversations, or we're getting ready to engage in these conversations, he has kind of these 4 things that he laid out. One is be intentional about when and where. Make sure people know that they're coming to a conversation that's going to be about race. You don't just bring race up as, oh, we're talking about race today, when no one was prepared for it. And it's probably not the best thing to do at the end of a day when people are already tired. It's not something to do when you're just rushing, like, okay, we have 20 minutes left here, take it away, talk about race. Like, make sure we have time to actually really engage in that. So be really intentional about when and where, the context and the conditions. Pay attention to the parameters. Who is speaking? How much time are you giving? What are the subjects, the themes? Make sure that we're monitoring the types of communication styles that are coming forth. And it's hard in an online environment because there's a lot that people are giving you in their body language that you can't necessarily get. Be intentional about the groupings. This is what I'm learning more. I'm gonna start saying no to schools when they're like, come do something with our whole staff. I'm learning that's not a good idea. That I cannot monitor all of these things when I'm working with your whole staff, and I've never met your staff, and I'm gonna be the one Black person and the whole room is gonna be a bunch of white faces. Maybe we're gonna do this with just your instructional leadership team at first. And then we'll have your instructional leadership team build some skills and start to do this. So I'm learning a ton about this particular bullet this year. How do you create conditions for groups to be mixed? Maybe I need to bring some people from this school and from this school together so that they can have some different points of view, because it's hard. You can't have a multiracial conversation about race in a group that's all white. So you have to figure out how are you going to bring that perspective in, and then be real intentional about the prompts. What are you asking? Make sure that the prompts force the discussion to be on race. If we're trying to have a conversation about race, we're not talking about diversity or inclusion or these vague terms, but be specific about what you mean. So I think it's an important chapter. We could spend a ton of time in this chapter, but I hope that that was useful for you. And now we're coming up on the time that we need to break, I believe. Any final thoughts?
Just
All right, well,
just a quick question, Marcus. What kinds of activities or conversations do you have going on right now in the district, other than with the board? Do you have some things going with groups of building leaders or within certain communities within the district?
yeah, so we're having this same conversation with all of the principals and assistant principals. We're doing the same book study with all of them and central office leaders. So we're doing that on a monthly basis. And so they started before you, but you have caught up to them because you're doing every other week. So now we're both in the same place on this chapter. But that is a group of, almost 100 leaders. So that's a different thing. Then with some of the schools, I'm also having this same thing. Right now, I'm doing this book study with everyone because, like I said, if we don't agree on the agreements and the conditions and the parameters, then we're not going to have productive conversations. So this is where I'm starting with all the groups. With Cabinet, we're doing a book study of Kendi. We're going through that entire Kendi book. And then I have maybe 5 schools that have invited me in to have multiple conversations with either their instructional leadership team or with their entire staff. But we're doing this with the same book with all of those groups. And then once we finish the 6 conditions, then I expect those conversations to go very different directions based on the individual needs or what they want to talk about in their setting. But right now it's about ground rules. Is we're going to stick to these 4 agreements. We're going to practice these conditions in whatever conversation it is that we're having. And my hope is that that creates conditions for us to be productive and not have it go way out some type of way.
Okay, great. Thanks for the update.
So Marcus, we've reached the end of our time. Thank you so much for leading us through this. And I very much appreciate your leadership as we work to become a board that's more focused on equity. I appreciate your leadership very much. Unless you have something to add, I'm going to suspend us until 4:30.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Everyone, we'll be back at 4:30 and begin our board meeting. Thank you so much for participating. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Steve, for joining us. Is Jacob here?
He is.
Okay. What we're going to do first is ask Jennifer to do a roll call to make sure all board members are present, and then turn it over to you for an introduction of Jacob and any of your staff that are with you. And then Jennifer will put a flag up on the screen, and Jacob can lead us in the pledge at that time. And then if he can, hang around for a minute, because I'm sure board members will want to ask him some questions. Okay. So I'm going to call the meeting to order. Jennifer, could you please call the roll?
Sure. Donald Davis Jr.,
Here.
Graciela Villanueva,
Here.
Martha Rice,
Here.
Raymond Navarro Jr.,
Present.
Norm Walker.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. The superintendent and his cabinet are also here, but we have a very special guest with us this afternoon. And Principal Brownlow, could you please introduce our special guest?
Absolutely. I hope I can. I believe that Jacob's mom indicated that they were in the meeting, but I don't see their name. So Goretti, if you're in the meet, could you unmute and let us know? She said she was standing by. Is there anybody that's on hold that has to be let into this meeting by chance?
I don't have anybody holding, and the call-in is Marcus.
While we're waiting, are there any more questions about Garfield's first day back?
I think we'd like to hear about that at some point.
All right, we'll get to that.
There
Looks
she
like Goretti
is.
jumped in. There he is. Hi, Jacob.
Hi, Mr. Brownlow. Hey, everyone.
Hi, Jacob. How
Hey,
are you?
Jacob.
While we're waiting, are there any more questions about Garfield's first day back?
Well, that's a bit of a delay.
Jacob, it's so great to see you today, and I can't wait for you to share the Pledge of Allegiance and the Garfield Pledge with the school board and our visitors. So I'll let board President Mrs. Rice take over, and then she'll let you know what to do, okay?
Okay, Jacob, we're very happy that you're with us today. Mrs. Baird is displaying the flag on the screen, so you may start the pledge whenever you're ready.
I'm going to start with the Garfield Pledge. Hand over your heart, other one to your back. I pledge allegiance. I am a Garfield Great. I treat others with respect. I am responsible. I treat others with respect. I'm responsible. I treat others with respect, and I am safe. Now, the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great job, Jacob.
Thank you, Jacob. That was wonderful. You did a great job. I very much enjoyed hearing the Garfield Promise. Is that what you call it, the Garfield Promise? Or Pledge?
Pledge.
Pledge? Okay. I stand.
Jacob. Sorry,
Go
Mrs.
ahead.
Rice.
No, go
Jacob,
ahead.
Jacob, would you like to do the Garfield Pledge one more time?
Please.
Okay, let's do it together. You ready?
Hand over your heart, other one to your back. I am a Garfield Great. I treat others with respect. I am responsible. I reflect on my choices, and I am
safe. Awesome. Great job.
Very, very nice.
Thank you, Jacob.
Good job. Good job. Mr. Brownlow, do you have other staff that are here with you today?
I did not see anyone in the roster or in the attendance, but I can assure you that if they're home resting, they earned it.
Jacob, I'm going to let the rest of the board members ask you some questions because we always have questions for our students. So let me see. Ms. Villanueva.
Hi, Jacob. My name's Graciela. Did you get to go to school today? In class? In person?
No.
Okay. Are you excited to go back to school? What's something you're most excited about?
Being with my friends.
Yeah, I bet you miss your friends, huh? Well, thank you for being here. You did a really good job on the Pledge of Allegiance and on the Garfield Pledge.
Pastor Davis.
Hi, Jacob. Great job today. I'm Pastor Davis, and I'm proud of you, and I know you're ready to get back to school. When is your first day of going back in person?
Thursday.
Thursday. Okay. I think that's the day I'm scheduled to come over. Hopefully I get to meet you in person. And what's your favorite subject?
Oops.
Okay. Well, you keep up the great work, Jacob, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you on Thursday.
I think my favorite class is Mrs. Esquivel's class.
What does she
Okay.
teach?
She teaches math.
Matt. All right.
And Eureka math, which is we say words and sometimes spell them out.
Very nice. Mr. Navarro.
Thank you, Martha. Hi, Jacob. My name is Raymond. I just want to say it's my pleasure to meet such a great young man such as you. How old are you?
7.
7 years old. Wow. I'm impressed. And again, I'm just very, very happy to have met you. I know you're going to do well in your school and middle school and high school. I know you're just going to breeze right through them. So what is it that you plan to be when you grow up?
Well, I don't know actually, but the most thing I'd like to be is an astronaut.
Nice. That's awesome. I can see you being an astronaut and doing things that nobody's ever done before. So once
I
again,
just want to be a scientist.
nice. Keep up the math. The math is going to be
DNA stuff. And you know,
nice. Nice meeting you, and thank you so much for your time.
Mr. Walker.
Hi, Jacob. My name's Norm. Nice to meet you today. Thanks for helping us out. What's one thing you like to do when you're not in school?
Sometimes I like to color with my sister.
Oh, okay. When do you play when you play?
Sometimes I play with my Legos.
Oh, Legos. Okay. You don't leave them on the floor for people to step on them, do you? Okay. That's good. I'm glad you think about safety. Nice talking to you.
Jacob, you did a great job with the pledge today. We're very happy that you could be with us. Thank you so much.
Oh,
We'll see you.
bye.
Have a wonderful day on Thursday, okay? Steve, thanks so much. He is absolutely a treasure.
He is. He's actually done the pledge for us in our morning announcements probably 3 different times this school year, and he's become kind of a rock star at Garfield, especially among the staff. So thanks for inviting him, Jennifer. Thanks for reaching out to Garfield and inviting us to do this. We really enjoyed the opportunity, and if we get a chance to do it again, we'd love to come back. Nice.
Do you want to share with us about your day and kind of usurp some of the superintendent's glory?
You know, I'll just leave you with some positivity, knowing that we had a lot of students excited to be at our school today. I'm not trying to embellish that at all. It's just our parents were excited to have their kids back. I was really pleased to see their support of what we're doing, and our staff worked really hard, and they were all really positive. So in a very difficult situation with everything going on, I was just really happy to see everybody seemingly positive about where we were at. So I know we have a long ways to go, and there's probably some other mountains to climb, but at this point, I feel like we're off to a great start.
The nice thing about hybrid is you get 2 great starts.
Yes, and you know, for the first time, I was thinking about this for teachers, that you have the anxiousness that comes with the first day. I get that too, the butterflies, but it'll be interesting waking up on Thursday morning to start with a new group, and it'll be a little bit different feeling, you know, because you get the first couple days under your belt, and things start to kind of fit where they need to. So yeah, I think it's all coming together really well.
Well, good luck, Steve.
Thanks, team. I appreciate your support. Wish you a great day. And I'm going to step out and take my son to basketball. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your meeting, and we'll see you down the road. Thank you.
Take care. Have fun.
You too.
Well, that was fun. I do want to remind folks who may be new to the streaming of our board meetings. When we first started in with the suspension of school and in the governor determined that that board meetings could not be held in person. And then in January, the state Senate created a resolution that allowed for remote board meetings to continue as long as we were still in an emergency declaration. When we moved to phase 2, the governor determined that school boards could have an option of meeting in person or meeting remotely. Last week, the board discussed this and determined that we would continue to meet remotely for our Monday morning meetings, our Monday afternoon meetings, excuse me, and other meetings as necessary. But for our business meetings on Tuesday evening, we would go to in-person. We're still working on the logistics for that. And there will be a remote option for those who want to remote in during the business meetings. And though that our business meeting 2 weeks from tomorrow on the 16th will be at the Eisenhower auditorium, the theater. So there should be plenty of seating. We are limited to 25% capacity or 200, whichever is less. Folks will have to do attestations and contact information, much like we do for coming into the school building. And so there'll be more coming out on that as we move toward the date of the 16th. So that will be kind of our first time to see each other in person for over a year. So there is that.
Martha?
First, yes, go ahead.
I have a question because I did miss the last board meeting, but I'm wondering, is there an anticipated date to return for Monday board meetings in person?
At this point, we're going to continue in remote and probably until such time as we move out of phase 2 or the governor determines that all of our meetings should be in person. If if there are board members who feel differently about that, we can have that discussion.
Yeah, and so I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm all for returning in person for Monday board meetings as soon as possible. I just think that as a board, we need to set the example. If we're having our teachers and staff return to schools, then I feel more comfortable personally returning to in-person meetings as a board. So, and then, just looking at when a return date would be, maybe that can be a topic of further discussion, another meeting.
Sure, we've got a retreat coming up on 3 weeks from now. So perhaps that would be the topic of a topic of discussion at the retreat, if that would be okay. Okay. First item on our agenda today is the superintendent update. Superintendent Green.
Thank you, President Rice, members of the board. President Rice, you did steal my thunder a little bit because, of course, I would like to talk about the move to a hybrid model, which started today. So we have pre-K 1-2, grades 6 and 9 that have all returned to sites. I was able to visit 4 of our schools and get some feedback from some of our principals. Every bit of feedback that I received was absolutely positive, even in visiting the sites. Tremendous excitement from our staff members, from our principals, of course, from our kids and our families. Nancy Smith commented that they had the great first day for cohort A, K2, K1-2, and only 6 students were absent, which was super exciting. Jewel, who's here with us today, commented that they had lots of students in a great freshman orientation, and she can't wait until tomorrow. And she walked around taking photos all day long of kids for the yearbook. We heard from Eisenhower. This is pure Janae Bourgeois commenting that today went fantastically. That's a quote. She said, "I was so excited. It was really hard to settle down after the kids left." We heard from a number of other people, including there was a comment from a teacher that I wanted to share with you. And she shared, "I wanted you to know that the first day back for our K1-2 went fantastic today." Commenting about her principal, just said everything was fantastic. We couldn't believe how well it went. Happy staff, happy kids. At the end of the day, the kids left with happy masked faces and said that they had a great day. There were a few nervous faces in the morning, but not at the end of the day, and just said they can't wait to see the rest of the students. We heard from Stephanie, our principal up at Gilbert, and this might be the quote of the day. She said, "One first grader told me this is way more cooler than doing school at home." So that's a great comment. So that was my experience in visiting with Martin Luther King, Ridgeview, Lewis and Clark, and Hoover. was great. Lots of smiling faces. Same report that I just shared with you from the firsthand accounts from our principals. I know that several members of my cabinet, if not all members of the cabinet, were out in buildings today as well. I have not had a chance to debrief, so I won't call on each one of them individually, but I will have Dr. Darling, could you share a report? I know you kind of took a different approach and you spent a big chunk of the day at one school, McClure. Could you give us kind of a more thorough update on what a longer time period at the school looked like for you?
Yeah, thank you, Superintendent Green. So throughout the year and several times each month, I check in with McClure. That's kind of my go-to school that I've been assigned to beginning last year. And last week, I was in contact with Principal Lee, asking her how she could put me to work. And so, knowing my background and all the advanced degrees that I hold, she had me in charge of handing out lanyards and attestation forms. And so that was my job. Any parents that pulled up to drop off their students, I made sure they had lanyards and attestation cards, and we walked them up. And they didn't need me. She was just trying to make me feel important. But I think so. I stayed there for a big chunk of the morning doing that, and then I was there again at lunchtime when they were having the students go away, and they had changed the student parent drop-off area, so they kind of spread parents and students out across campus. And like you heard of the other schools, they had thought through just about every scenario they could think of. They had all hands on deck, and you could tell kids were smiling even though they have to pull their masks up because they're trying to talk or hug somebody. And it was so hard watching teachers that deny hugs of these students because you know how excited students are, especially at that grade level. So they give air fives and air hugs, and we'll get there again soon. But it was heartwarming to be doing school again like we know how school should be. I had a chance to be at Ike for a little while. I saw their drum line welcoming students in, and that was fantastic. And then I actually went over to Wilson because I know that the principal at ISO was at home not feeling well today, but they didn't need me. They had everything dialed in. Students showed up, staff was on hand, and I just got in the way. So those guys should know what they're doing at our schools.
Thank you so much, Dr. Darling. I appreciate that input. So I know that we had many other people out that could report, but we'll hold those for now. And maybe if they share something later, they may sneak in a story or two. So thank you for supporting this move to hybrid learning. I would be remiss if I did not thank once again Stacy Locke and her COVID response team and the fantastic preparation that she put forth, and how that really played out with our staff as well. So it was not just our district COVID response team, but the teams at every single one of our buildings, teachers working with our classified folks, working with our administrators to make today a great success. And we do look forward to tomorrow, a successful day on Tuesday, and then having our next cohort come in on Thursday and Friday. Along other things, there's one other item I want to share with you this evening around my superintendent update, and that is to share with you how our partnership, a little bit more about our partnership with the Yakima Nation. I'm extremely happy with our partnership and the growth that we've seen over the last 4 months in working more closely with the tribal leaders and the wonderful time that they have given to me and to some members of my team as we worked on making sure that we have a true partnership where we're able to support our friends in the Yakima Nation and receive support from them as well. As you remember from last year, we do now, for the first time, acknowledge in an official capacity the Treaty of 1855, and that will be acknowledged this year. Unfortunately, it does fall for us after school is actually out, so it may be another year before we celebrate that day away from school as a day of celebration. But that is right around the corner for us next year as well. But having that in our calendar is something that truly signifies our relationship with the tribe and how we are looking at our relationship in a much more symbiotic manner as of late. The board may also recall that we had some conversation several months back about a proclamation and a land acknowledgement. That did not fall off the map. We have been working over several months to make this a reality. So what I've asked to happen today is for our Executive Director, Sean McGeaney, He will present here this evening. First, he'll have a couple of words and say a couple of things for us, and then he'll introduce again Elise Washins, who's here with us this evening, and we're honored to have her as a representative from the Yakima Nation, our education liaison, or I'm sure you have another title that I'm not sure of right now, Elise. So I look forward to hearing that. So right now, there it is, Yakima Nation Tribal Council Education Committee. I don't know why I didn't remember this. So here we go. Yakima Nation Tribal Council Education Committee Liaison and Higher Education Manager. Fantastic. Thank you. I think we finally found a person with a longer title than Dr. Pimpleton. So with that, please, Sean, would you take over?
Thank you for that introduction, Superintendent Green. And it's my pleasure. Trevor, do you want me to show the land acknowledgement now or in a minute? Just let me know when, just cue me.
Okay. Why don't you go ahead and show it now, if you would, the work that has happened on this. Thank you.
All right. So this is a culmination of really 3 years of consultation with the Yakima Nation. Elise has been the lead communicator between ourselves, the district, and the tribe. So Elise, I'd love for you to introduce yourself, and then maybe we'll just kind of discuss the land acknowledgement together.
My English name is Elise Washins, and I am the Yakima Nation Higher Education Manager and the Yakima Nation Tribal Council Education Committee Liaison. And I'm here at the request of our chairman of the Yakima Nation Tribal Council, Chairman Delano Saluskin, as well as the Education Committee and the Deputy Director over Education, Arlen Washins. Today, I just wanted to say, which is the Yakima way of acknowledging the land as a part of my heart and the part of the work that I do. And a land acknowledgement is a formal statement that recognizes and respects Native people as a traditional guardian of lands and the enduring relationship that exists between Native people and traditional homelands. Land acknowledgements and the work that we've done with the Yakima Nation, with the Yakima school districts, excuse me, is a part of the work that's established as under the Yakima Nation traditional tribal government. Yakima Nation is one of 2 traditional tribal governments that exist in Washington State as of this time. So we're a resolution-based tribe, similar to how school board operates. And for this part, we have Tribal Council LEH Committee Action, or Tribal Council Education Committee Action .075-2018-3 that we're introducing this work. I'm going to speak in Yakima first. It's established meaningful tribal consultation. And this work falls under a larger Yakima Nation education plan that was approved by both the Tribal Council, consisting of the 14 Tribal Council members under T-32-18, and a larger Supreme Power of the People, which concerns all of our members over the age of 18, that voted to approve the Yakima Nation Comprehensive Education Plan under GCM-9-2018. And this particular land acknowledgement was reviewed by both the Education Committee and the Yakima Nation Tribal Council and all the tribal leaders in between here and there, and our elders as well. So thank you for speaking, and I'll pass it back to Sean to go ahead and introduce the land acknowledgement.
Thanks, Elise. So the land acknowledgement is really fruit of the consultation. It has been made in collaboration between district representatives and representatives of the Yakima Nation. So we're really proud of this work and really excited for what it represents. We set out to kind of establish this acknowledgement, and it says it actually in the second paragraph. It's just a simple acknowledgement to show respect and correct the stories and practices that have erased Indigenous people's history and culture, and it honors the truth. So this is what we've put forth. This kind of what we've kind of come together at. We've kind of tried to, in words, describe all of the land that was once inhabited by the confederated tribes and bands. And it would be, the intent of this would be to take a moment at every meeting at the district. I know the board's looking at the same option here. And then to read this, and then it's almost like a moment of pause and reflection to remember that piece, and then we kind of go forward. And we've seen that some other state meetings, and it's just a really powerful moment. So this is where we are in development. Did you want me to read the whole thing, Trevor, or are we good with just broadcasting?
I would like for you to read that, please.
Sure. All right, so here's our land acknowledgement. Today, the schools of the Yakima School District rest on the ancestral lands of the 14 confederated tribes and bands of the Yakima Nation. The people of Yakima Nation inhabited more than 12 million acres across Adams, Benton, Chelan, Douglas, Franklin, Grant, Kittitas, Klickitat, and Yakima counties. Today, we honor those native peoples who are tied to the land through history, legends, and culture. We acknowledge their descendants who live in the world today. We thank the caretakers of this land who have lived here and continue to live here since time immemorial. An acknowledgement is a simple, powerful way to show respect and a step toward correcting the stories and practices that erase Indigenous peoples' history and culture. It also honors the truth. As a school district, we will continue to build upon our relations with the Yakima Nation.
Thank you, Sean, and much gratitude, Elise. Thank you so much for your statements, for being here today. We honor you in being here. We recognize that we have a true partner in a sovereign nation, the Yakima Nation, and it means so much that you would take time out of your day to be here and to support this move forward in our relationship between the Yakima Nation and the Yakima School District. Are there any questions from members of the board at this time? Or statements?
I'll just say that I'm really glad that we're doing this. I think it's a wonderful acknowledgement and speaks well to the work that we're doing around equity. So thank you for everyone involved in bringing this to fruition.
I also want to thank Sean and especially Elise with their work on creating this land acknowledgement. Elise, we very much appreciate the partnership between the Yakima School District and the Yakima Nation and the pivotal role that you have played in the development of us being able to honor the nation in this way. So thank you very much.
Yes, Elise and Sean, I want to thank you guys for putting this together and what a great job in honoring your ancestors. And we are grateful and thankful for them allowing us to use their land still today.
Yes, I do want to make a comment. Alicia, just want to honor you as well. And thank you for coming to our meeting today. And thank you for all the work that you're doing in terms of allowing us to acknowledge the Yakima Nation's land. It's a privilege to be able to do that. I know this acknowledgement is only the starting point. It's just the beginning for us. And so that's just going to open, I believe, more doors for a bigger and better partnership. That way, so that the school district can continue to better and better serve Indigenous students. We know that we need to do that. And so thank you so much. Please send our best to the council and to your elders and just to the Yakima Nation in general. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I would just add here at the end that we also worked on a proclamation that will be shared at a later date, but we do have Elise here, and I want to share with board members that the approval of the proclamation at the request of the nation, we will actually approve the proclamation prior to the approval of the Yakima Nation. So for us, that may seem a little bit kind of out of sorts, but we have to also remember that, of course, the Yakima Nation is a sovereign nation, and we are operating at a request to have them approve a proclamation. So I can tell you, and Elise could attest, being here this evening, that the proclamation that we worked on and will present has been approved by the individuals that were part of forming the proclamation, which included Elise was there, I was there, we had our tribal chair and deputy director were there as well from the tribal nation. So we're excited about that, and certainly could tell you that will be approved at the level of the Yakama Nation. Is that correct, Elise?
Yes. So thank you. This is the traditional tribal government of the Yakama people believes that consultation will be occurring as a full table. And so when the tribe does meet to approve the proclamation, it will be a full table of 14 meeting around the proclamation after it's signed and approved by the board. And that was at the direction of Chairman Delano Sluiskin. And tribal consultation with Yakima School District is newer, so we're establishing these processes and protocols. And Chairman Delano Sluiskin would like for the full table to enjoy this process of consulting with the Yakima School District as we've done in the last 2-3 years. And we're going to be reviewing the proclamation and approving, and it will be probably be since consultation has begun as it is under federal law, it's the first proclamation that we'll be seeing from a school district concerning treaty days.
Thank you, Elise.
Excuse me, Martha, I think it would be appropriate that on our first meeting where we do read the proclamation, if Elise would be able to help us out with having students or representative from the Yakama Nation to perhaps help us read that the land acknowledgement and maybe the Pledge of Allegiance and so forth in terms of in the Sahaptin language. I think that would be very appropriate, or something that I would like to see if the board is agreeable to that. So
I agree with that one.
Could I interject there?
Go ahead.
And this may be a good opportunity because this was something that we had a conversation about. And I think that when we think of the land acknowledgement, we certainly are using this as a method to honor the people on whose land we meet. But I think we also have to remember that for the people whose land on which we meet, it does not have the same meaning and the same feeling. So I would actually counsel against having a tribal member or a member of another native tribe read a land acknowledgement because of the way the land acknowledgement is interpreted as being on the land of the native people. And I don't know if I expressed that well enough. Elise, could you maybe give your perspective on that as well, or not?
I'd be happy to attend, and I would be happy to attend and to also provide a version of the land acknowledgement in the Yakama language that kind of echoes what is being read in English by another person.
Perfect. That would work. Thank you. Then we will work on that assumption then moving forward. And Sean, I'll leave that to you to coordinate for us, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. Do you have anything else under superintendent update?
No, I do not.
Okay, the next item on the agenda, Elise, thank you for being here with us this evening. I saw your name pop in when we were doing our finishing up our equity workshop, so it was nice to have you here. You're welcome to stay. We understand completely, though, if there are other things that are calling your name, like dinner or something else. So we completely understand if you need to leave us, but thank you very much for being here. Next item on the agenda is the Superintendent COVID-19 update. Mr. Superintendent?
Thank you. And I will expedite this process a little bit here, and we'll turn it right over to Jewel Brumley for our data update, and then to Stacy Locke for our internal district update. Jewel.
All right, thank you, Superintendent Green. The daily cases in Yakima County are still going down. We had a little bit of a plateau this last week. As you see the tail end of that line going straight across rather than going down, but we're still on a good curve here. So our daily cases still remain much lower than they were in January or even February. The first part of the month, we've tailed off. So that's just going really well. Our rate per 100,000 for 14 days is 267 as of this weekend. So that went down again. So that's good. And our rate per 100,000 for a 7-day rate, it actually was exactly the same. When I say plateau, it really was a plateau. And then our rate per 100,000 in the region, if you notice, has changed, but everybody's below 300, which is really good. Columbia County, I have to laugh again because their rate per 100,000 is up to 50, and that's because they had 2 cases. So 2 cases out of 3,000 people. So our zip code data as of last week is still coming down. Each of those bars are lower than the other one. So the one the week before, so that's really good. Hospitalizations this weekend went up a little to 17. We'd gone down to 12, but went up to 17, but less people are intubated, so that's a good thing. Hospitalizations around the region have also gone down. So last week, Benton County was at 29, Walla Walla was at 6. So hospitalizations are going down in the region. Positivity rate, we actually lowered our positivity rate. This is today's a really positive day, and Steve Branlow talked about positivity of getting students back, but our positivity rate went down in COVID, and that's the best thing we can do. So, and we're not the high for the region anymore. So Franklin County has 14.5, but if you notice overall, everybody's positivity rate is going down. Columbia County hadn't put in their positivity rate yet today. It takes a little bit for the state to catch up on that. And then here we are at the region. I suspect our positivity rate will go down the next 2 weeks if they measure it, but Inslee suspended that for now, and it's going to keep everybody paused. So I don't know if they'll talk about the regional one in 2 weeks or not. And then our school age cases, 15% of the cases in the last 2 weeks were school age students. K5 had the most. Remember last week, 9-12 had the most. So just varies from week to week. In the last 2 weeks, we had 10 new students and 8 new staff across the county that were positive for COVID, but that's across the county. And then our forecast is still going down. If you notice, I don't know if you can see the little bump on the blue line right about the beginning of March, but the statistics actually said we would kind of flatline this week. So I'm kind of happy about that, that the numbers proved out true. Anybody have any questions?
Questions from the board?
I don't have a question on the specific data. That's great news. I do have a question. I read about the plan to have farm workers provide vaccinations for school staff. Where are we with that plan?
I expect Stacy may have an update for that. I see her nodding. So any questions for Jewel? Thank you, Jewel. As always, a great report and very helpful for us as we continue to plan for whatever comes next.
You're welcome.
So good
Superintendent? We'll just turn it right over to Stacy then, huh?
Go straight to Stacy.
Okay, Superintendent Green and the Board of Directors, it's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. I'd like to share some updated information as of today. And so what we're seeing is as we progress through, our contact tracing and investigation was a little higher this week. This last week, we investigated 27 different cases, 5 positive. And so out of the total student and staff that Jewel just reported, we had 5 of those were ours, 9 negative, and then we still have 13 pending outcome. We've had 158 total investigations since January 4th. And as you can see, we still have quite a bit pending, but it's pretty even all the way through. So weekly positive COVID test, we had 9 last week. We're down to 5 this week. We had 2 student and 3 staff to report. And again, if we look at that graph, if you go back to February 8th, we started in-person tutoring with students, and you can kind of see how that is played out moving forward. Asymptomatic testing was up a little bit this week. We had 18 last week, and we put out the information again requesting that individuals take advantage of that once every 2 weeks. That's a way to mitigate exposure in the building. So we had 42 tests last week, and a total of, we've given 410 asymptomatic tests since the beginning of the year. We are currently in the process of working with student athletes, their coaches, their parents, and our health services staff to see how student testing may begin to move forward once every other week. And so right now we're just in the process of putting that all together. Again, you can see our numbers here over time in our ability to test. And we're really wondering, now that we are back in-person learning, we're going to rearrange the health services time to test so that our teachers have a better opportunity to do that on their off time, either before school, during lunch, or after school, and take advantage of that. So vaccines, again, we shared with you that we had over 2,000 people that had signed up for vaccines. Last week, we began a community partnership with Farm Workers Clinic, and we sent them, we received permission from our 137 employees to send them their names last week for scheduling. They did so the latter part of last week. So a lot of our employees received that testing this week, or that vaccine this weekend, sorry. And story after story came back so positive. They were so organized. There was no waiting. In fact, the longest waiting time was after you received the vaccine to wait for any reaction. Everything was color coded. You walked in, everybody was efficient and ready. And they just really appreciated them sticking to scheduled times and moving people about very fluidly. So this week we're sending them the Tier 1, 1B additional 65 names. We're receiving consent from the employees to do so. And then we will begin the next round. We're preparing to schedule that and get employee consent to move forward. Any questions? We do realize that there are other clinics out there offering testing, not necessarily, they may be scheduled, and then at the end they're offering any leftovers up to everybody. And through the Office of Emergency Management and some of our other connections, as we hear that information, we'll make sure that we get that out to our employees also if we receive that in a timely fashion. We did not receive the information for the clinic that was conducted at the mall this weekend. So we did miss out on that. But our fingers are out there and asking and probing for additional placements for our staff and their families.
Norm, do you still have a question? Any questions for Stacy? Stacy, thank you and your team for developing that partnership, the role, whatever role you played in that. I had put my name in. They called me on Friday and said, can you come to get a shot on Saturday? And I said, well, I would, but my daughter's getting married. And then she said, well, how about Sunday? And I said, well, I would, but I've got 12 people coming for brunch. So she said, well, we'll call you later. I said, that sounds great.
Awesome.
So
Awesome.
I'm looking forward to that phone call.
Great. Yeah, whoever was in charge of organizing that down there did an outstanding job, and all of our employees. So Jewel, did you go down there? Yeah, I think Jewel went down there. It was a great experience. And so when we're really excited because we want it to be a positive experience. If getting a shot can be a positive experience, but again, organization and going to our schools this morning. The signage that's out there, the communication with parents. We had 2 videos go out this weekend to parents, an additional video to staff. So we have a lot of communication out there. And in the schools I was in this morning, I mean, everybody was doing a phenomenal job, and it was as smooth as you just can't even imagine. It was like they'd been doing this their whole lives, and hopefully they don't have to, but I mean, kids were following through, staff was there welcoming, everybody was excited. So I just had to get my 2 cents in, Trevor. Thank you, board. Appreciate it.
That's wonderful, Stacy. It's always nice to hear the stories about, what's going on in the buildings, and this is a pretty big step. And we appreciate hearing all of those stories about kids being excited to come back and staff being excited to see them. Mr. Superintendent.
Thank you, Stacy. I'm so glad you added your experience there at the end, and appreciate knowing how it went. We had not had the chance to talk, so I usually like putting people on the spot, but I didn't want to do that tonight. You've worked so hard to prepare, but I'm glad you did share that. That's all I have for this evening. Thank you, President Rice.
Okay, next item on the agenda is the 2021-22 budget development parameters. Mr. Superintendent, are we going directly to Becky, or did you want to lead in on this?
No, we'll go straight to Becky.
Miss Becky.
She's a pro by now.
Well, good evening. Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent Green, and thank you to the board, President Rice. So these are the budget development parameters for 2021-2022. If you can imagine that we're already there. So I'll just go through these. You should have them in your board packet, but the board sets an expectation for sound financial practices, appropriate checks and balances, prudent investments, and effective planning for and management of district resources. Policy governance 1000.2.4 statement, financial planning for any fiscal year or the remaining part of any fiscal year will not deviate materially from board of directors' ends, goals, priorities, risk fiscal jeopardy, or fail to be derived from multi-year consideration. The following parameters listed in random order will serve to guide our discussion, analysis, and development of the district's general fund budget. Number 1 is the district is committed to and accountable for providing quality educational programs and learning opportunities for all students. Number 2, resources, people, time, and funding will be aligned in accordance with the district's strategic plan, federal and state education reform standards, instructional strategies, and assessments consistent with effective schools research. Number 3, the district will provide a safe and healthy learning environment for students and staff. Number 4, decisions that change program or direction will only be made after considering their impact on student learning. Number 5, the district will comply with all federal and state laws, regulations, applicable legislation, contracts, and labor agreements. Number 6, teaching and learning services, as well as other central services support are necessary to support instructional programs. Analysis discussion of the impact must accompany budget reductions in this areas. Number 7, optional programs and activities for both staff and students that are not self-supporting should be considered for reduction first. Safeguarding basic programs that are required by the state or district and considering the effectiveness of programs. Number 8, the total number of employees, if the total number of employees is reduced, reduction in force, will be recommended only after reasonable placement alternatives have been exhausted. Number 9, in general, one-time resources will not be obligated to support ongoing expenditures. Projects and activities without ongoing funding should have a formal sunset date. And number 10, the district will not fail to maintain an unreserved fund balance of 5% or greater of the total general fund budget without board approval. Do you have questions about the budget parameters?
Any questions or comments from the board? These should be familiar to us. We've reviewed these annually about this time every year for quite a while now.
Martha, I wonder if we might consider, or if we should consider, infusing the term equity somewhere in these budget parameters, considering the work that we've been doing and the focus that we're trying to infuse in everything that the district does. I don't have a specific recommendation for wording, but I just want to ask if that's something we might consider.
Is Mr. Superintendent, is that something that that the staff could take a look at and adjust accordingly?
Yes, we can.
Graciela, do you think these should come back to the board once that review for equity has been completed?
Not necessarily. I mean, it certainly would be interested to see where it falls in, but don't think it needs to come back for approval.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Becky. Are there any other questions from board members? I appreciate having these parameters. I'm asked usually 2 or 3 times a year by board members from other parts of the state how we pull together how our budget is formulated. And I just send them a copy of the parameters. I said, these are the boundaries within which the district gets to operate in creating our budget. And it never ceases to amaze me that more districts don't have budget parameters. It's always a surprise to me that they don't, but I'm glad that we do. So thank you, Becky, for that. I appreciate that. This is not an approval item, I don't think. No. So we'll let the staff go forward and take a look at this and see if we can infuse some reference to equity within these parameters and let Becky go forward and do her magic.
Yeah, just one comment there on the second item, number 2, refers to the strategic plan. So again, there might just be a phrase could be inserted in there that because equity is part of the strategic plan that just emphasizes that. But I agree with Graciela, since that's a major focus, it certainly would be good to point that out in writing. But but it would fit pretty logically in number 2.
That's a good suggestion, Norm. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is a policy governance monitoring report for policy 1000.2.4, financial planning and budgeting.
Thank you.
Becky.
Okay,
So
if you want to begin, yes. This is the Executive Limitations Monitoring Report, Financial Planning Budgeting 1000.2.4 for March 2021. I have provided you a series of attachments that are referenced along the way as I go through this. So hopefully you have those available to you, and I will just reference them as I walk through the evidence. Policy statement: financial planning for any fiscal year or the remaining part of any fiscal year will not deviate materially from Board of Directors' ends, goals, priorities, risk fiscal jeopardy, or fail to be derived from multi-year considerations. Further, without limiting the scope of the foregoing by this enumeration, number 1, the superintendent will not allow budgeting that risks incurring those situations or conditions described as unacceptable in board policy financial conditions and activities. See policy 1000.2.3. This is in compliance. Interpretation: I interpret this to mean that the adopted budget must provide adequate resources to settle district obligations, collect funds owed the district, maintain reserves as set forth by the board, and ensure the budget reflects known legislative changes. The evidence of compliance: policy 1000.2.3, financial conditions and activities monitoring report, was presented at the board meeting on December 7th, 2020. Subsequently, a survey of the board was presented at the board meeting on January 4th, 2021, finding the superintendent as being 100% compliant. Additional compliance is demonstrated by the monthly general fund budget and financial status update report provided to the board. And this has a reference to see attachment A and attachment F. Attachment A is the policy 1000.2.3, and attachment F is that financial update report. Number 2, the superintendent will not allow budgeting that omits credible projection of revenues and expenses, separation of capital and operational items, cash flow, and disclosure of planning assumptions. This is in compliance. I interpret this to mean that the budget must be based on reliable planning assumptions that are made transparent to the board and general public. Cash flow must be appropriately managed for timely response to district needs, and the integrity of capital and operational budgets must be maintained. The evidence of compliance: the budget development process contains systems to guarantee reliable revenue expenditure projections and communicates these to the board and public. The following documents and processes fulfill this requirement in annual cycles: implementation of budget development parameters, which is the budget parameters that I just reviewed tonight. That's your attachment B. Revenue projections based on enrollment projections. Compensation and benefit budgets built on current negotiated agreements. Distribution of building budgets based on enrollment projections and adjusted to actual in October. The cash flow analysis and projection with monthly reporting. That's references attachment F, which is the monthly board report. Separation of operational general fund, ASB fund, debt service fund, capital projects fund, transportation vehicle fund. Attachment D is the budget and excess levy summary, which displays that our budgeting is separated. Continuous monitoring of enrollment, revenue, and expenditure budgets in order to manage any fluctuations from projections. And again, that's attachment F, the monthly board report. Item 2.1, the superintendent will not allow budgeting that plans for the expenditure in any fiscal year of more funds than are conservatively projected to be available during the year. This is in compliance. Interpretation, I interpret this to mean that the budget submitted to the board must balance revenues and expenditures in a way that meets the board's targeted goals for reserves. The evidence of compliance, the 2020-21 final budget presentation, that's attachment C. The annual budget F195 budget and excess levy summary page, which is attachment D. Item or number 2.2, the superintendent will not allow budgeting that fails to reflect anticipated changes in student enrollment and employee compensation, including inflationary adjustments, step increases, performance increases, and benefits. This is in compliance. Interpretation, I interpret this to mean that the budget submitted to the board must include all anticipated changes in enrollment and employee compensation costs, including changes resulting from known factors impacting student enrollment, legislative cost of living adjustments, local bargaining, step increases for education and/or experience, health insurance contributions, pension contribution costs. Evidence of compliance, I certify that the annual budget submitted to the board for adoption includes all anticipated student enrollment adjustments and anticipated costs associated with employee compensation. Number 3, the superintendent will not allow budgeting that provides less for board prerogatives during the year than is set forth in the cost of governance policy, see policy 1000.3.8. This is in compliance. I interpret this to mean the board budget will include adequate funding to meet board goals. The evidence of compliance, the annual budget, F195, objects of expenditure page, displaying program 97, activity 11, identifies the board budget. And that is your attachment E. Number 4, the superintendent will not allow budgeting that is not in a summary format, understandable to the board, and presented in a manner that allows the board to understand the relationship between the budget and the end's priorities for the year. This is in compliance. I interpret this to mean that the budget document for any fiscal year will be summarized for ease of understanding and will specifically support the board's ends priorities. The evidence of compliance, the 2020-21 final budget presentation included a summary overview of all funds, including a narrative of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, known as a SWOT analysis, ensuring the budget addresses the board's ends priorities for the district. And this is your attachment C. And finally, number 5, the superintendent will not allow budgeting that proposes budgeted fiscal year expenses to exceed revenue, thus necessitating a planned reduction in the fund balance without complete explanation, which includes written documentation explaining the rationale for the proposal, as well as allowing sufficient opportunity for discussion and consideration of the proposal by the board. This is in compliance. I interpret this to mean if the proposed budget is not balanced and necessitates the use of fund balance, the amount and rationale will be communicated to the board in some form of written documentation as soon as reasonably possible to allow sufficient opportunity for discussion and consideration by the board. The evidence of compliance, the preliminary budget presentation, which includes a summary overview of all funds, is presented to the board in the month of June. In the event of planned reductions, the presentation will include an explanation and rationale of the impact to the fund balance. After this presentation, the board has the opportunity for discussion and consideration leading up to the final adoption, which by law has to occur no later than August 31. And recommendations for changes, I have none. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. Are there any questions from the board or comments? Okay. All right, Jennifer, when will we see this and when does it need to get back to you?
A survey will be sent this evening and will be due this Friday.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Becky. As always, a great presentation and very thorough. Mr. Superintendent, do you have any final comment on this?
Only to add upon your words of thanking Becky for her thoroughness and for really elevating the position to a manner that is understandable and taking the budget and making it something that we can all benefit from. So thank you, Becky, for your work on this.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is a policy governance monitoring review of board policy 1000.3.4, board president's role. Is there a board member who would volunteer to walk us through this?
Sure. The board president's role provides leadership to the board, ensures the integrity of the board's process, exercises interpretive responsibilities, and normally serves as the board's official spokesperson. The board president's job is to ensure the board's conduct is consistent with its own rules and those imposed upon from outside the district. Meeting discussion content will be on those issues which, according to board policy, clearly belongs to the board to decide or to monitor. Discussion of incidental information that is for neither monitoring performance nor board decisions will be minimized and always noted as such. Deliberations will be fair, open, and thorough, but timely, orderly, and kept to the point. When requested, board meetings will include opportunity for board self-assessment. When requested, I think there's a comma missing. When requested, board meetings will include opportunity for board self-assessment as described in another policy, 1000.3.1. The authority of the board president consists of making decisions that are consistent with board policies in the governance process and board superintendent linkages, with the exception of employment or termination of the superintendent. Instances where the board specifically delegates portions of this authority to others, the board president is authorized to use any reasonable interpretation of the provisions in these policies. The board president is empowered to conduct board meetings with all of the commonly accepted power of that position, such as ruling and recognizing. The board president has no authority to make decisions about policies created by the board within the ends, goals, and executive limitation policy areas. Therefore, the board president has no authority as an individual board member to supervise or direct the superintendent. The board president will usually represent the board to outside parties in announcing board-stated positions and in stating chair decisions and interpretations within the areas of authority delegated to the board president, unless this authority is delegated. The board president may delegate the authority but remains accountable for its use. Other duties include compiling and facilitating the board's summative evaluation of the superintendent, executing all documents authorized by the board except as otherwise provided by law and on behalf of the board in concert with the superintendent, developing proposed board meeting agendas consistent with the board's annual calendar. And the vice president's role will be to preside at board meetings in the absence of the president, and she'll perform all of the other duties of the president in case of his or her absence. And the authority enumerated in this policy constitutes the full and total delegation of responsibility by the board.
Thank you, Graciela. Are there any comments or suggestions for corrections to this particular policy? Seeing none, we'll let Jennifer do her magic. We'll see it later on tonight and be back to her by Friday. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is a a policy review of board policy 1000.3.5, board members' code of conduct. We have a board member who would volunteer to take us through that.
I can do that.
Thank you, Norm.
Okay, let's see. I have to make the print a little larger.
If only.
Okay, board members' code of conduct. The board of directors commits itself and its members to ethical, businesslike, and lawful conduct, including proper use of authority and appropriate decorum. It has the right to expect adherence to this code of conduct. The board is mindful that actions of board members, even outside of official board business, reflect on the board and the district as a whole. Board members will represent the interests of the entire community. This accountability to the whole district supersedes any conflicting loyalty a member may have to other advocacy or interest groups, loyalty based upon membership on other boards or staffs, conflicts based upon the personal interests of any board member who is also a parent of a student in the district, or conflicts based upon being a relative of an employee of the district. Number two, members must avoid conflicts of interest with respect to their fiduciary responsibility. There will be no self-dealing or business conducted by a board member with the district, except to the extent expressly permitted by law and appropriately disclosed. As required by the Washington state law, members will annually disclose to the Public Disclosure Commission their involvements with other organizations, with vendors, or with any associations. When the board is to decide upon an issue about which a member has an unavoidable conflict of interest, that member shall absent herself or himself without comment from not only the vote, but also from the deliberations. When the board is to decide upon an issue about which a member has an outside association that is not clearly an unavoidable conflict of interest, as described in section 2.2 above, but that might cause question of a conflict, that member will disclose to the whole board, which will determine whether or not the member shall absent herself or himself as described in 2.2. Board members will not use their board position to obtain employment in the organization for themselves, family members, or close associates. Should a board member apply for employment, she or he must first resign from the board. Number three, board members may not attempt to exercise individual authority over the organization. Members' interaction with the superintendent or with staff must recognize the lack of authority vested in individuals, except when explicitly board authorized. Members will not give personal direction to any part of the operational organization or assume personal responsibility for resolving operational problems or complaints. Members' interaction with the public, press, or other entities must recognize the same limitation and the inability of any board member but the president or designee to speak for the board, except to repeat explicitly stated board decisions. Except for participation in board deliberation about whether the superintendent has achieved any reasonable interpretation of board policy, members will not publicly express individual negative judgments of performance of the superintendent or employees of the superintendent and district. Number four, members will respect the confidentiality appropriate to issues of a sensitive nature and other matters that may compromise the integrity or legal standing of the board and district. Materials shared or notes taken within executive and closed sessions will not be removed from the session. Executive and closed sessions are confidential. Discussions held in executive and closed sessions are not to be discussed with anyone else other than board members, the superintendent, and legal counsel. Number five, to build trust among members and to ensure an environment conducive to effective governance, individual members will focus on issues rather than personalities, support decisions of the full board, exercise honesty in all written and interpersonal interaction, never intentionally misleading or misinforming one another, criticize privately, praise publicly, make every reasonable effort to protect the integrity and promote the positive image of the district and one another, never embarrass each other or the district, maintain an effort to foster unity and harmony within the board, abide by their own rules and policies, grow as a board member by attending workshops and other types of in-service training, not surprise the superintendent or board members at board meetings or public venues with hidden agendas or unexpected topics.
Thank you, Norm. Are there any comments or suggestions for adjustments to this policy? Seeing none, we will send it into the survey machine. Jennifer is being very efficient. We already have 2 of the 3 in our email boxes. Okay, next item on the agenda are items of board interest. Are there any board members who wish to share any items with the rest of the board? Okay, I did receive notice this afternoon that the Congress has approved President Biden's appointment for Miguel Cardona as the new Secretary of Education. So he's sort of coming in at a frying pan to the fire kind of moment, I think. So we'll see how that goes. In legislative news, next Tuesday, the 9th, is the date by which all bills need to be out of their House of origin in the legislature. So any House bills need to have worked their way through and all the committees and gotten to the floor and been approved and moved to the Senate and vice versa for the Senate. So the list will start winnowing down pretty significantly after next Tuesday. And then they go through the whole process all over again in the opposite house. There are still some bills that are of interest to WASDA, and you can find those on the Strategic Advocacy webpage of the WASDA website. They have a spreadsheet in there for following bills, or if you get the in-session newsletter that came on Friday. And so there's an update in there for bills that WASDA is watching. Any questions? Mr. Superintendent, do you have anything for us under items of board interest?
I just wanted to surface one more time the board retreat topics. I don't know if that is going to be a conversation here or for another time.
Well, we should probably talk about it here because the retreat's in 3 weeks. Board members who have any topics that they wish to include in the retreat should get that to Jennifer within the next day or 2. Originally, we had asked for last Monday, but I think February got away from us. I know it got away from me. So if you have any items for discussion at the retreat, now would be the time to surface those. Jennifer, do you have a list of what's on the list so far? I'm kind of springing this on you, so.
Oh, no, that's fine. Just suggestions were the superintendent's evaluation, which has to be done before April 1st, the equity work, and discussion about in-person meetings that Raymond brought up earlier in the meeting today.
Raymond, did you have anything to add?
Yes, there was some unfinished business that I don't seem to recall at this time. I think Graciela was going to present on on a topic. I forget. So maybe we can look at the unfinished business, see if we want to bring that back to our agenda. So
From when the August retreat?
yes.
Okay. Well, look, I don't recall. August was way too long ago.
It was. And too many things happened in between since then, right?
True, true. Norm?
Yeah, I just have one other sort of little news item in celebration of a former Yakima student. His name is Dr. Stephen M. Bradley, and he's a professor at Loyola Marymount University, and he teaches in the African American Studies Department, and he's published a book.
Nice.
And the book is entitled, oops, just lost it here.
That's a
Upending the
strange
Ivory
title.
Tower. And it's a book on civil rights and African American experience and history of protest and history of protest in the Ivy League. So it's an important history piece in America, and he's a graduate of Davis High School. So I thought that
Interesting.
was kind of a nice thing for, and it's kind of timely in the fact that we're studying equity right now.
That's great news. Good for him. Anything else? Okay. Mr. Superintendent, we have a need for executive session?
We do not have a need for an executive session this evening.
Okay. Check this out, folks. We are finished and it's still somewhat light outside. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Except when the sun is shining in my west-facing windows during a meeting. Okay, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us this evening. We appreciate all the input that you provided and the support that you provided to the board. Have a wonderful week, and we will see you next Monday.